Yes, I paid $1,649 for this processor. And yes, I am aware that for some of you, this is the cost of your build and any upgrades you'll be making for the next decade, at least until you finish this video and find out how you also can too afford a top tier build like me when you realize I had just as much of a struggle as you to get to this point in time. At this point, I am not really going to dive into benchmarks, as owning the top spots all over a host of benchmarks known for focusing on total performance of your computer versus specifically written graphical-based gaming tasks that by nature don't matter thus far in any discussion I offer, well, all of those don't seem to matter. People are willing to accept that Intel is strong in software developed in principles rooted in years of Intel's dominance and payments to the industry to keep development on the software side just as hostile towards AMD and their multi-core approach as possible, but then get angry when I tell them that code that they swear specifically single-threaded in efficiency can always become parallel if the programmer is talented enough and paid well enough to make solutions to the problem. Here is where I believe I make the strongest case for my argument. Take a look at hard drives. Their entire purpose is to store information, and we can argue that no matter the type of data, the drive's job is to store it as fast as possible. Naturally, fragmented drives suffer extremely heavily in speed, which is what many of us blamed Windows for in earlier times when system instabilities were not just limited to the tinkerers only. Growing up investing hours of my time into understanding hard drive behavior, I am probably one of the only ones out there who could tell you how to increase the speed of any hard disk by increasing your sector size, your initial disk format. Like when it tells you 2048, 4096 is that little sector size, the allocations, going way past into like 64K, why is that even offered? Well, if you have external drives, that's your reason. If you are storing large amounts of compressed data that is in solid form, aka very neat start and ending bits of data on its data that's coming in, there's no small file size that the end of the file is not large enough to fill a sector, and then you have to, basically the hard drive now has to do its own magic on how it will end that small piece of data, and even worse, if it has to fragment that small piece of data, you're taking an even bigger hit there. So this is the entire idea, that there is always a way to constructively get around a limitation. Imagine if you actually decided to use one core for compression only, which could somehow, with the right set of disks, increase total speed. That's what I did here, because for most people, you're looking at this type of performance with this little bit of investment, but it's definitely server in nature. You can see how attractive a build like this would be if you want to game, but also live stream and know that you're not going to crash when you're live streaming. But let's go back to hard drives. Growing up investing like hours of my time into understanding hard drive behavior, I'm one of the few who will say this to you. Your solid compressed files versus the split files, which yeah, they're pretty good, but they're not going to be as good as one solid file. It's much easier for the drive to store. 32 cores in my disposal, even with a mild clock speed. I'll argue any performance hits that I might take if, let's say, oh well, Intel has PBX 512 and you're only doing 256, but well, what if I could just throw a little horsepower at the problem? That's kind of what we do with rockets in the beginning. You threw horsepower at the problem, and then you got efficient as time went on. That's where I am standing, in my opinion. I have given AMD enough of an investment that the OEMs and AMD understand that this is what the people want. With the investments into AMD, we can imagine that they are going to create more efficient designs. And that has already been announced. Lisa Su herself held up a die that shows what comes next for Threadripper. And the beauty of what we are creating here, for you at home who cannot afford this processor, understand that I am the type of person who, if I really want that next processor from Lisa Su, I am willing to cut a deal on this current processor for whatever it is, just to get my hands on the next top tier design and enjoy the progression that they give me. And in return, the third party market, the aftermarket sales, the used device market, all become profitable because you have an entire stimulation of top tier chips that are actually worth owning, even if they're not the current generation king, suddenly being made available by people who can finally afford to play the top tier game because AMD forced the prices of Intel down by just simply getting good. And if you want to blame AMD, imagine if there was ever a time in your life where you knew you were struggling and you made some decisions that were not the best decisions, and the person who is actively paying to make your life miserable will use those moments to put you down and tell you, well, look at the mistake you made, that's why you can never be number one. If you support that type of mentality, you can never be angry at anybody who does that to you. So this brings me back to the hard drive argument again. A hard drive is always asked to store more information with less space and do it faster. And it was always a single-threaded thing. If you think about it, it is one single stream of data that you need to store as fast as possible. So how can you not say it's parallel? It's single-threaded. If you find any way to make it parallel, you are proving my point in how going AMD and going multi-core is the smartest approach if there's this thing called AMD fine wine. This is so hard for me to explain to people, but usually have to force them to watch a video before they're patient enough to argue with themselves to prove themselves wrong by trying to research how to prove you wrong, only to come up with the same results. This is what I'm doing here. I would argue also, if a 0 and 1 is your definition of logic, how is quantum computing starting to become a thing? Do you even understand that in quantum computing, the whole idea of the qubit, how they say that if you observe the data, it changes? The principles of quantum computing is, well, we can use the idea of an assumption to suddenly increase computing power beyond what we ever thought possible. Because now, I could imagine that all you ever really needed was a 0 and a 1. The same way a black hole only ever needs one atom of every single type of atom that could ever be created, and then it would just convert all the atoms of the universe that make up mass. It would break down that energy to run the simulation that defines the matter that you see. But then that's exactly what we're finding with modern research and science into quantum research, that we are living in a simulation, and this is the way that you get there. Parallel computing, going to quantum computing, going to predictive and assumption-based computing, and then before you know it, you're at home enjoying wireless messages coming out of the sky. Or better yet, how can you believe me right now? I'm an invisible sound coming through your wall, and you have to assume that I have your best interests at heart with anything I'm telling you here. And with my cockiness, with my Kanye West attitude, I understand. You probably don't like hearing me win all the time. But I spent my entire life being called a loser, and that's the point of becoming a winner. You're here because you are a winner. You know how to do your homework. You know that you're thinking to yourself, damn, he's right. But if you feel like anything is in your way, don't take my word. Just look at my numbers, look at my performance, and ask yourself, can I do this too? Go online and look at anybody who made that choice before you. Trust me, someone always will for it to even be a choice for you. That's just what it is. So, getting back to what I have here, I wrote something for all of you to stay on topic, and I still struggle with this. Algorithms can easily change any type of software into a heavily multi-core process by simply writing code to assume and then just check one time, just check the assumption. And if the assumption is strong enough based on the way in which you can write the code to quote unquote think and approach a problem rather than just throwing a single thread processing time and tested way of computing at it and then turning up clock speeds and forcing everyone to accept that, if you could think about things a little differently, you'd realize AMD is giving you so much more performance. You get so much more computing ability with any AMD offering, and all it takes is just a few updates that care about you to make that happen. But the investments have to be into that direction, and it's only because of quantum computing that AMD is getting a chance all of a sudden. So, as I was saying, algorithms easily change any type of software into heavily multi-core processes once you can write code to approach that problem a different way. And I know any programmer watching this is probably itching to downvote, thinking I will put this cross on their back. But I am angry at the OEMs for supporting Intel's game this long, to make all of you software designers and software engineers and people who invested years of your life into learning one specific code, expecting me to tell you to turn your back on it to learn something new. No, I get it. You should be angry too at the OEMs and Intel. You can't really blame Microsoft if Intel the entire time even dictated the software that Microsoft could write with whatever they did. This is how deep the problem goes, folks. You have to blame Intel. Intel was basically, like, think about it, folks. I'm going to put this in a different way. The OEMs have so much shame and embarrassment all in their faces. Think about it, simply because you may have gone with AMD. That one time you couldn't really afford that Intel computer you bought, but Intel paid AMD's best friends, their best friends for Christ's sake, to treat AMD like you've probably felt like people have treated you, that they've lied to take your money and then blame you for any mistakes you made along the way from your disadvantaged position that had you had a fighting chance, you may have made much better decisions. You have to understand, Intel themselves experimented with chiplet design before. They have done so much work with Xeon with this and turned their back on it to continue with the silicon lottery. I can imagine that the complexity at the time and the understanding of computer hardware logic back when we were still probably trapped to 14 nanometer, 16, 20, 24, and much larger, I can imagine the complexity and the understanding at the time would have made that such a choice that Intel decided the profit margin in keeping silicon lottery the standard practice was just too tantalizing of an offer. I mean, you can imagine the OEMs were probably on Intel's side here, with every socket change forcing people to get a new motherboard, because now you're allowing them to pretend like they're saving you money right now, but then they're making you play their game the next time you upgrade. Whereas AMD the entire time was like, bro, sis. It took Lisa Su coming in to change the way that AMD thinks, and of course it took a woman to think outside of the box. That's why now we've got multiple boxes on a die with chiplet design, and before we know it, I bet you Lisa's got something up her sleeve with her whole hardware team, with the way that she has told them to think about this problem. And I have invested to make sure those solutions come to life. This brings me to my most dangerous point. It would make no sense to have invested that time in research into chiplet design before AMD, because Intel can easily support architecturally all of the single-threaded mess that they created, forcing consumers and the server market to blame Microsoft, blame Apache, blame Linux, blame AMD, blame, like everybody else but the one person who created the actual standard and created the lay of the land. Microsoft, Sony, and so many vendors now have finally invested enough time and money into AMD, especially Microsoft going with AMD and Sony going with AMD for the last generation of consoles, that all these vendors are understanding AMD is actually increasing sales, making desktop PCs not only easier for people to assemble and buy, but allowing the more smart shoppers out there who understand the value of consoles to finally have no argument left for building even a cheap gaming PC and joining us in the PC master race. And then when they decide, well, you know what, I built this cheap PC, but I really should have gotten that top tier 1800. Oh snap, you're telling me because AMD made this socket drop in, I can probably just get the newest one that's even cheaper per watt, and I could just maybe save up a little bit, spend a little time, and I could buy that top of the line CPU, and it would just drop in, and I don't need a new cooler, and I might not even need new RAM, and wow, I may not even need anything new other than just the CPU. Is that a possibility at a price that before we never even had Intel offerings at? Then what are we arguing? Why are you upset? Why does it make you so mad to hear me say I'm better than you in my choice, when any person on this planet who does anything in terms of money, time, and empathy will tell you this would be the smartest choice? If you're looking to invest in a build, you need to think of these. Intel is using their large coffers right now to fund the disillusionment of computer and workstation buyers into thinking that the solution will be single-thread performance. But this video will show that I can eat all of the fruit off of Intel's table, enjoy all of the performance that people swear is not possible on AMD, because I'm doing it right now. I just had to spend the kind of money that an Intel guy would spend to disrespect your AMD choice. But then when Ryzen comes back, Intel's going to be the only one left out of the future of all the profits when everyone is suddenly going AMD irrefutably. If you are looking to invest into a build, no matter how much you have to spend right now, AMD only has 3 sockets available at the current moment. You have the completely old bulldozer for those of you who might be in a country where you're not able to get anything new, and they'll probably be cheaper, way cheaper than an Intel build, and you just have to be willing to not be able to say that you got anything top tier, but you'll still be able to probably do a lot more than your current computer allows you to if you allow yourself to just give up on some of the things you may have wanted right now, understanding you might achieve something greater. But if you do have Ryzen and Intel products available to you, you can demand Ryzen products be available to you. They are cheaper by nature. If they're more expensive, you need to ask the people who control how they get to you why the AMD offering is more expensive. If it is not, you should go with the AMD option, and I am not paid to tell you this. I paid AMD to tell you this, and I took my money away from Intel to tell you this. I would rather put my money into a company that is bringing chiplet design, that is thinking outside of the box, that is even willing to go backward in terms of a die size, and tell you to shut up and deal with it, just because they know it is the only way to solve this current problem. If the Windows scheduler is obviously showing that I could do something like blow up an entire server of Minecraft and not fail, why are you telling us, oh, well, you know, 32 is good, it's not gonna be good for gaming and single thread performance, and then, okay, so then I'll let you shut off course. Oh, but then you have to shut off course to be able, so you just keep moving this goalpost? Not anymore, folks. Every time an Intel fan posts a higher score than you today, understand AMD has finally beat them, because by nature, AMD just has to put more chips, more cores, and they can just throw algorithms and software at the problem and beat Intel at every game that they have. And all it takes is Microsoft and AMD playing together to make sure the Windows scheduler can handle it, and they themselves can force even the game studios getting paid by Nvidia, getting paid by Intel to keep performance away from going multi-threaded. Microsoft could literally completely multi-thread your single thread for you, bro. We're at that point, and that's what's got Intel so aggravated. That's why they're dropping SKUs. That's why they're willing to cheat to your face and do things that are so unethical, like using phase coolers that pump out more cooling ability than the power of my total computer right now, just to convince you they can pull off a 5 gigahertz claim and force you to continue thinking that you're going to spend that much money on a golden die when you could have just gone with AMD and for that same price accepted that you just got to wait for the software to get better. Come on, folks, don't do this to yourselves. Don't do this to yourselves. You smoke weed, that's your weed money right there going AMD in the future. That future time that you had to buy a computer and you weren't able to go buy yourself that much amount in, like, let's say, I don't know, a massive bag for yourself in a legalized state, there you go. That was you making a terrible decision years ago that affects you today. If you are here right now with an Intel build that you knew had you gone with a Ryzen build and you're currently upset that you didn't make that choice, this here will help you never make that choice again. Every time an Intel fan posts that higher score, understand this is a person who didn't know their privilege keeps them from investing in themselves in the long term. We spend so much of our lives on our PCs, and they contain some of our most cherished memories, and yet you will try to nickel and dime an investment in a PC, but you go to work every day in hopes of buying a home one day. But then you won't invest in the one thing that could very well bring you that money if you decide to approach your life a different way, like I currently do, being married to a hot wife and living every day making content like this and getting paid for it without having to ever have corruption be part of my business methodology. This is the point. I think it's a terrible argument to say that I should ignore the cost of upgrading coolers, components, and other items, not just the cost in terms of money, but the fact that I will have to do it just because I require that CPU upgrade to access something very small like hardware-based H.264 video encoding or H.265 video encoding that's hardware-based. And anybody who's compressing H.265 right now wants to cry about the idea that Intel might force you to go to an entirely new socket, motherboard, setup that you just puts it out of reach of you, aka it was always that way designed. And that you may have actually gone Intel this time instead of going with Ryzen. And that when you see AMD finally drops all that stuff for us, you're going to be the one who can't upgrade. And all of us just went and dropped in those CPUs, resold them, poorer people than us bought them, can now finally do something that in their socioeconomic status never were able to do before. And it's AMD who, once again, pushes computing back to the front for all of us in the real world and not just living at the top. That is what I'm here to do. I'm here to steal from the rich and give to the needy. I am the Robin Hood of computing, and this is my Robin Hood song. Yeah, 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 yeah. Ha, 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 ha. Ask yourself, if we are doing i9 now, why couldn't that happen any sooner? You're telling me that they couldn't have done i9 and the core counts they have right now sooner, turn the clock speeds down, and marketed those chips a long time ago for a much cheaper price, it would lower clock speeds and have created an entire market for us, multi-core, that software developers would have had multi-core systems way earlier and come up with these solutions way earlier, and we wouldn't be having this debate right now. In fact, Intel would probably have killed AMD for good if they had decided to be that selfless. Intel could have approached chiplet design too and posted these results before, but they didn't. And guess what? If AMD can post results like this without anywhere near the funding and investment that Intel has, what could we have right now? Had Intel never spent $250 million 4 times a year to Dell alone, not to carry AMD, and imagine how much more money was spent. Remember, folks, this is all made in servers, and that is what controls you on desktop. Please question, when you invest your money into a company, what their motives are. This is voting, folks. Every dollar you spend is a vote, and these companies are used to steering narratives around because they never fight a common enemy except other businesses. Computing is confusing by nature, and Intel damaged the PC market with years of anti-competitive business that scared many console users and potential online friends away from amazing titles on PC. So many PC games that were only possible on PC failed to ever reach a sequel just because those of us who are entitled often forget others have it way harder than us, and it is our job to try to make the best available to all before we can start casting stones. Many console buyers would have loved to have probably experienced a PC game, but because of the prices and because of the difficulty of building, which is the only way to even get a top-tier build for a cheaper price, many console buyers are fanboys of consoles today and refuse to look at PCs after years of snobbish behavior by Intel fans who used money to put down people who did not have ability. Whereas I am here trying to give the poorest people the best ability possible at the cheapest price. So, until the day that anybody can prove me wrong, I will not just throw stones, I will throw meteor after meteor at Intel. Because this choice puts my wife and I at risk. This video is forced on us when we realize after years of being underpaid artists, my brother actually hanging himself 2 years, almost 3 years ago now. Valentine's Day will make 3 years because of choices similar to mine, making choices that did not profit us in the long term. And they led to our depression. Is it worth, all this drama for 5 FPS in a game when you can settle for a slightly little bit less performance and still enjoy the game, but then you have so much more you can do to help yourself earn so much more in life? Was my depression worth nearly ruining my business when I nearly lost every photo I've ever taken because of an artificially limited amount of PCIe lanes I was unaware of being something that could make a stable overclock become unstable with every device I plug in over time, too busy working to be gaming, and finding out that this is something that I should have catered for. And despite the limited bandwidth available, I still was trying to get work done, and it finally reared its ugly head when I diagnosed the PC and realized the reason I could never find the problem was this was the only time I was running multiple compression jobs between multiple I/O devices, and I was making the PC do something it never did for hours and days on end, and my Intel build finally said enough is enough. My current build is 99% stable, and I say 99 because I refuse to turn the voltages up. I'm looking for that golden low voltage, that golden LLC setting that can offset the voltage droop for when the processor heats up. I have to find a way to balance the thermals, the resistance, the voltages to get the perfect performance from this. And when I achieve this, I will walk everybody through this. So make sure you like and subscribe, because this is the first blessing I can give for a 100% fully stable 5500 plus Cinebench machine that can run on air with no water cooling. And that is very important to anybody right now looking to build a workstation that also games, not a gaming computer that also works. And I really hope this video opens your eyes and your ears, and most importantly, your heart, not so much your mind, but your heart, to understanding why it is important sometimes to root for the underdog, even when the underdog may need your help more than they can help you. Because someday that underdog might come back and bite everyone who hurt you and be the one to carry you all the way to the top. A big shout out to AMD for making Threadripper possible, plausible, and most of all, an irrefutable choice for me at home, and for my wife too. I look forward to the future of computing. Thank you, and have a great day.